You're listening to Clifford Kelly on Straight Truth Radio, the podcast.
Grace and peace be unto you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. This is the Straight Truth Radio podcast, the place where the truth endures forever. I'm your host, Cliff Kelly. Thank you for tuning in, being with us this evening, here where we're just trying to bring understanding to end-time events. We're getting ready to jump right into this episode. Again, we want to thank you again for being here with us. Just before we get started, just want to share with you a few ways you can contact us. Again, you can hit us up through email. That's straighttruthradio@yahoo.com, straighttruthradio@yahoo.com. Also, if you're watching us on our, we like to keep a reminder of our social media format platforms there on Facebook, Clifford Kelly, and the Straight Truth Radio page there on Twitter. At Straight Truth, the letter R and the number 1, at Straight Truth R1, and also on YouTube, Straight Truth Radio Podcast. Those of you who are listening to us on our audio format, the podcasting format, we want to thank you so much for, again, listening to us. Please, and we ask you that you continue to share, like. But you can find us on Anchor, Apple, Breaker, Google, Overcast, Podbean, and Spotify. So we're going to get right into this episode here. This episode which we're calling Race, Justice, and Kingdom Living. If you've been following following the platform, you'll notice that this is the part 3. We've done this episode before, and this is the conclusion of that. And we're going to go ahead and bring our guests up this evening. My friend, my brother, family, the attorney, Jason L. Carter, Esquire.
Thanks for having me, man. Thanks for having me. I feel sad when you said this was the last one, the conclusion. We're going to have to find some other stuff to talk about.
Oh, no, we're definitely going to find... Yeah, we're definitely gonna find some more stuff to talk about. Definitely. So hold on one second. What is going? I think there's something happening here. I want to make sure there. We had a good connection here for a second, and all of a sudden, give me 1 second here. I think we're good now. So again, this is Jason L. Carter, Esquire. Say hello again.
Hello, my brother. Hello.
There you go. Something didn't
Perfect.
It didn't catch before. So,
well, I was probably on some trash, so it's good that it didn't come through. So I'll take it.
All right. So, very quickly, back in January, we celebrated your birthday. Your wife,
that happened. Yeah.
Your wife, Dr. Tisha Carter, through the surprise party. It was a surprise, right? I mean, you were surprised, right?
Yeah, it was a surprise. I mean, I tell everybody there were elements I was surprised about, but when large sums of money start moving from the account, I get curious. So to the extent she could surprise me, there were surprises, but I definitely knew something was amiss. And
she had to give an account for herself. She had to give an account for herself, huh?
But
okay. All right. So we're glitching here a little bit. It happens sometimes. I get tired of that.
I mean, we just had to have conversation, you know.
All right. So at that party, I got a chance to meet some of your friends and other guests that we were actually celebrating with, and something strange happened with me. You know, I'm sitting at the table, and one of the young ladies like, "You're the guy." I'm like, "Uh-oh." I'm like, "What guy?" So what happened? I'm like, "You know what? No, you're the guy. You're the guy with Jason, the podcast." I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, okay." Whew. I was grabbing my chest for a second there because I didn't know what she was talking about, but
no one ever wants a lady saying you're the guy.
Right.
I agree.
Right. You don't want to be the guy. So, but as we were mingling and talking to a lot of the other guests there, you know, your friends and whatnot, we discovered that some of them were saying, "Hey, look, you got to continue that conversation because you left some stuff on the table." So I was like, and I really, it kind of, you know, doing episodes every week and everything, it kind of, I kind of forgot what we had left on the table. But I do remember saying we want to get back to this once the trial is over with and everything. So I said, okay, well, now this is the perfect time to do that. So here we are.
Indeed. The trial and the election, right? We can't leave that monumental.
Yeah.
We had
the
a conversation where we said,
we still got to talk about that, right? We still,
absolutely. We can't leave that one out. Yeah. We have to count that hanging chad. We can't.
Yeah, the election. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I tell you what. Listen. If we can get to it, we'll get to it. Okay.
Indeed.
All right. So anyway, here we go. Fresh off the trial, we have the verdict. We now see Derek Chauvin beginning, or well, not beginning his sentence because the sentencing hasn't happened yet. But we know that they revoked his bail and he's been remanded to jail, so he will be spending that time there. So I guess my first question, as we kind of start the conversation, I know when I sent you the note, I wrote it up as George Floyd versus Derek Chauvin, and there really is no versus to that, really, no. to be honest about it. But I guess I kind of, wrote it up like that because I knew this was going to be a topic of discussion. So just real quickly, topic number one, this is what we're going to hit on. How did you feel about the trial, first off? And you serving on both sides of it, right? Because you've both been a defendant and you've also served as a prosecutor also, correct?
That's true. Yeah, I've been on both sides. I was a prosecutor for a number of years, and then I had my private practice where I served as a defense counsel. And so, yes, I've seen both sides of the system and have a critique of both sides of the system. As it relates, without going into too much about that, I think as it relates to the trial, I think I want to think of it in terms of the conversations that are happening and the aspects of those conversations that bother me, or at least cause me some concern, especially when I hear Christians having these conversations. I guess topic A would be, I find it unusual that when we're considering the fact that someone lost their life, that someone died, that one topic of conversation that's fairly persistent is whether or not this individual had drugs in their system at the time of the incident. And I just struggle with the relevance of that when he died. If our call as Christians is to save souls, then we should be burdened by the fact that this soul died and may not have had an opportunity to come into a saving knowledge of Christ. Like that, to me, should be a principal focus of conversations that we're having as Christians. And then I ask the question of what we should be having societally. And I think societally, our question should be whether we want police officers to behave this way. We can argue back and forth whether the police officer in this case engaged in these actions because George Floyd was a black male. I've asked the question a lot of times to individuals, and the question goes this way. Let's think about who you could not imagine being in that situation. Could you imagine an 80-year-old white woman being in that situation? Like, could you foresee that? Do you think that Derek would have behaved that same way? And then continue to ask yourself that question until you get to Derek Chauvin, until you get to George Floyd. And I think that would let you know that there are still biases within our institutions, even within our own minds, that allow us not to conceptualize that happening to anyone that does not look like Derek. And I don't think the officer would have done that same thing. So I say all that to say that in this situation, I truly believe that this was an appropriate result. I think it was an appropriate result because we as a society at least are sending an indication that we do not support police officers who behave in this way. And I think we in a society have to be willing to critique our police force. They work for us. They serve us. And anytime they're beyond critique, I think we've lost a sense of what their purpose is in society. And I guess I just say that because so many times the conversation about, and I know we're getting there, and I will not jump ahead, but a lot of times you have these two counterpoints, right? You have Black Lives Matter, and then you have this Blue Lives Matter counterpoint that's come out recently. So it's not just all lives matter, but it's the fact that individuals who wear a uniform have the equivalency of individuals who are born into a certain ethnic group. And I struggle with creating an equivalency there. And I struggle with Christians who create an equivalency there. Because again, our pursuit as Christians are the souls of people who are alive to hopefully give them the gospel before they die. That's our pursuit. And we could go into the Beatitudes and the mourn with they that mourn and things of that nature. But ultimately, death should be the greatest indicator, should be the place where we start this conversation about George Floyd. And we should not allow ourselves to be distracted by other conversations about whether or not he had things in his system. Let me say this last point, and then I'll yield the floor. I think that what I struggle the most with are people from the conservative side of the aisle who regularly want to talk about George Floyd's past and the fact that George Floyd should not be a clarion call for a change in how we police in America. And my struggle with that is that they use his past to somehow diminish the movement that's occurred because of his murder. And yet, when people are attempting to take down monuments to presidents who were rapists or murderers, who owned slaves, who were racist, their position is you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can't get rid of these monuments because you're ignoring the fact that something good came out of all the bad things that this individual did. Yet you don't apply that same logic to George Floyd. And I just find that to be highly hypocritical. And I find that conversation to be very prevalent in the church. And that troubles me. So I hope that answered the question. Probably was a longer answer than you had bargained for, but that's
no. That's good. And it's really, it's what I expect of you. It's what I expect. So you're good. So then let me ask you this. So do you think that there was justice found here in this, when we look at this trial? Do you think justice was served?
Justice is a very interesting question. I think we have to look at justice two ways. I think that there is justice in the eyes of God. All right. And I think as Christians, I think we look at the fact that someone died and we ask ourselves whether the offender, this being Derek, whether there's still an opportunity for his salvation. And I think that in terms of justice, I think that the fact that he's going to face consequences but not be killed, right, not be subject to a firing squad for what occurred, I find justice in that he took a life, but yet there's an opportunity for him to still find redemption in his action. I find that to be just. In terms of the political system, I find that it to be just because what we're asking ourselves, or the question that we're answering, is whether we want police officers to behave this way. We've known throughout history of America that the pendulum of justice justice moves in very different directions. Just because I was a black man in a community that where my behavior for whatever reason made me appear to be suspicious. And these things are things that a lot of black and brown people deal with on a very regular basis. And so to me, justice was served because the hope is that it's going to keep the conversation moving about this issue. I think that we lost some momentum as a society, as a community after the civil rights movement, after the death of MLK. I think that a lot of our institutions, including our churches, kind of dropped the baton. And we've seen other organizations pick up the baton and run with it. Organizations that in many ways are very controversial, like Black Lives Matter. But I think that my hope too with this is that a lot of churches have decided to get back into the conversation of justice and equity and racial justice. And I hope that this will not cause everyone to take a collective exhale, but help us to continue to galvanize to fight the fight to make society more equitable.
Okay. All right. Well, I have a hard time calling this justice. I don't believe that this was justice at all to me. And because I think if anything, it was accountability. I would ride on the coattail of accountability. You have to be accountable for your actions, because this was not an officer. What's the word I want to use? This was not an officer trying to subdue subdue a person. You know, I mean, he was already handcuffed. You now have 4 people there. I understand that, you know, the video has been played so many times that you know that he had an issue. Okay, so he claimed about being claustrophobic. You know, there's something going on in his psyche. You know, whatever. So if your job is to serve and protect, then at some point in time, it would say to me that you need to get a paramedic there, because at least you can get him off the scene. If he's not getting in your car, then he could have went in an ambulance somewhere, and then you handcuff him to a gurney or something like that, and then take care of it, you know, that way. Justice for me is him still being alive. You know, he's still handcuffed. He's still charged with whatever crime, you know, forgery. I mean, to this day, do we really know that $20 bill was an actual counterfeit? Do we know that for a fact that it was counterfeit or not? So no one's saying that now, you know. But then also, you know, so justice for me is him off the scene and he's actually alive somewhere. I think, again, this is accountability. Following.
But Cliff, I challenge you. We don't have that, right? We have to go with the when you play spades, you got to deal with the cards that you got. The cards that we have is the George Floyd died.
Well, yeah.
So are you saying cannot be justice when there's death?
No, I'm still sticking to, you know, my thought that this was not justice. It wasn't. You know, this is not justice. And this is just one scene of it. I mean, there are many and other, you know, examples of, you know, we could come up with that, you know, also fit the scope of it not being justice. This is just what we're talking about today, right now. You know, again, for me, I think for that crime, if I understood, I don't know, what was that? Minneapolis. I don't know Minneapolis law, but I even think for that crime, I even thought I heard that you don't normally get arrested even for that. I mean, you're cited, So, so worst case scenario, you are arrested, okay? You still are alive, should be alive to meet the court date, to meet.
Oh, you're talking about George Floyd?
Yeah, George Floyd. Yes.
Okay. Yes.
So I'm saying in the end result of what happened to George Floyd, this is not justice. He was just held accountable for his action. Because if that's just kind of where I just.
I understand. I think I look at justice from the point of the act that brings us to the table forward. So I try to look at it from the death, right, from the murder of George Floyd forward. Mm-hmm. Does our justice system, because with the justice system is the hope to bring about consequences for wrong. Right. And so our justice system work? And I would say in this particular situation, yes, I think some people may disagree at the point of sentencing that, right, he's in I think a 15 to 20 year range for this, for what really constitutes murder. And I think a lot of people will struggle to digest that justice is served with the amount of time he gets compared to other individuals in our system, Black and brown people who commit similar crimes and often will get life or extended time in prison based on what they're charged with. And I think that there's great deference given to our police force when it comes to what they're accused of and how their actions are viewed. I think that there was a lot of conversations in this trial that would not be afforded an everyday citizen. And an everyday citizen who decides that they're going to grab somebody in any circumstance and put their knee on their neck until they're dead, or there would not be a lot of this dialogue about whether they intended to kill them or not. And so I do think that there are a lot of things afforded to police officers and that were afforded to the officer in this case that one could argue would suggest that justice really was not served, because in justice there has to be equity, right? There has to be a way to bring about some type of similar circumstances for everybody, regardless of their position in society. And I really think that's what people are fighting for, especially when it comes to this police brutality conversation. I often hear people push back that the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement against police brutality, is the wrong focus for the Black community, that the Black community should be focusing on Black crime. And I think that there are just some factors of that conversation that I think are different. What we're talking about is government-sanctioned harm to a community. If Derek Chauvin was allowed to get away with this, it would be considered government-sanctioned harm. And there are many other actions, Philando Castile, and many other situations that we can talk about, Trayvon Martin, where it really is government-sanctioned murder. And do we want a society that allows that? Because we know that the everyday individuals we're talking about, the Black-on-Black crime, if you will, and I don't really think that's a thing, right? The majority of crimes are committed by people who are ethnically similar. But if we use that just to describe the pushback, that Black-on-Black crime, that in those situations, individuals are sought, they're arrested, and they're punished, they're prosecuted. It doesn't mean that every single crime is prosecuted, but if they know the actor, if they know who the criminal is, and they can identify them, right? They find them, they prosecute them, and they spend time in jail for their actions. And one of the arguments that makes it different is that police officers in many cases are not prosecuted. They're rehired, they retain their pension, or they're acquitted. And we have a Brelo case here in Cleveland where the Brelo officer was acquitted. And if you read that opinion is one that I've always said, no, in all my years of practice, there's no way I would have ever been able to get a client off on the Brelo case. I'll just go into it very briefly. The Brelo case is the case where the officers jumped on the car in East Cleveland and fired an untold amount of rounds into the vehicle because the car was backfiring, but they thought that they were in an imminent threat. The officer who was charged, Brelo, had a bench trial, a trial to a judge without a jury, and the judge issued an opinion, a formal opinion. And in his opinion, he said that because we cannot establish which bullet actually killed the individual, we cannot find the
Hold on one second, Jason. I want you to go back and give that explanation again. We're having another glitch. Sometimes I don't know if this is what the issue is with this, but
there we go.
Okay. So go back and give that brief explanation on the Brelo, what the judge's explanation again, real quick.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah.
So the details are, what happens in the Brelo case is you have several officers who jump on the car of a couple individuals in East Cleveland, and they fire, an untold amount of rounds into the car because they believe that they're in danger. And Brelo's prosecuted. He's one of the officers who's prosecuted. And it was a bench trial, so just the judge heard the case. And the judge ruled, in his opinion, that because we cannot affirmatively establish which bullet actually killed the individuals in the car, we cannot find the officer guilty of manslaughter. And I just repeat that I can say with absolute certainty that none of us would get the benefit of the doubt in that situation. So the movement about police brutality, the movement in support of Black lives, which I've made the argument raises all cells for all people if we're successful. If our communities are successful in addressing these issues of policing, everybody's lives are better. But that movement, if you will, is about the fact that there needs to be consequences for individuals who engage in this kind of conduct, and there should not be a different standard for officers, especially when we can absolutely see that their actions are reckless.
Okay. All right. So it's two directions I want to go real quickly because we've already kind of talked into it. One is in the same week that we hear about the verdict of Derek Chauvin, then we hear about this case in Columbus. All right. And then, and then I kind of made a post. I made a post. I didn't kind of. I made the post. Well, I actually made the post. But anyway, and I didn't even think that I was going to talk about it. But I can't pull it up word for word right now. But in the gist of it, I was making the argument about whether or not BLM, meaning Black Lives Matter, not the organization, but whether or not Black lives really matter, okay? Because and whether they matter to us. Do they really matter to us? Okay? Not and when I say do Black lives matter, I'm not even talking about those of us who are not in the scope of the African American community, but do they really matter to us? Because in this instance, we have the officer who comes on the scene. He sees this commotion. A man, and I had to watch this video. I think I watched this video like 100 times already. So he comes on the scene. And he has a split second to like really, gauge what is happening here, what's going on, so he can make a decision on what what further actions are going to be taken. Here's a guy who pushes this girl to the ground. He kicks her, and from his webcam you can see he has his weapon low ready. He's already in that direction, but then this other young lady grabs the knife from the girl who's on the ground and then charges toward the car where the girl is in the pink and gets ready to stab her, allegedly. And then he ends the threat. Okay. So, rather than looking from the aspect of the officer came on the scene and saved a life, we're still looking at who he killed. And so, so the post kind of the post that I made was like, do Black lives really matter? I mean, do they really matter to us? I mean, not to everybody else. Do they really matter to us? Because here is a Black life who was trying to harm another Black life, and this officer, who happens to be white, but this officer responds to the scene, stops the one who was about to harm a Black life. It just so happens that the person who was going to do the harm was also Black. And we're still enraged because a Black life was taken, but a Black life was saved. And so I'm trying to gauge and register what do we do with this Black life thing? When do they matter and when do they don't matter?
I think that this is a great conversation to have. I say that because I wish it was more of a conversation and less of a bunch of people kind of politically shouting at each other.
Right.
Because I think there are a lot of questions that we would want to ask in this situation. The first thing I jump on is training. I think that one question that we want to have is this officer's training, right? To your point, you've described, I think, fairly accurately how an officer would respond. You talked about where the gun was positioned, things of that nature. I think we should be able to have the conversation of whether or not we wanted an officer, their first response in that situation to be to grab their gun. Good, bad, or indifferent, I think that's a conversation we should be able to have. And as a society, we should ask ourselves in a situation like that, if that was the appropriate first response. Because the gun was drawn at a time where that imminent threat of harm had not existed. I think there's about 9 seconds that take place. But I think there's training on the other side as well. There's training for the community. And I think a lot of people have taken judgment for these individuals about the actions that they've taken, how they brought about these circumstances for themselves. They've judged the father and the young lady who's dead for their actions, but we have no idea what their training was. We have no idea the circumstances that they found themselves in that caused them to make a lot of split-second decisions, ultimately costing the young lady her life. And so, is that a conversation we can have? All right, or are we not allowed to have that conversation because someone died? Are we able to have the conversation as to whether or not the officer engaged in a safe act by shooting 4 shots at a young lady when she was in such close proximity to the young lady who she was about to harm? Right? Was that a safe act, or did he really put the other lady's life in danger as well? I think these are all conversations that we should be able to bring to the table. Is it a conversation of saying that we're not valuing the life of the victim or potential victim because we're upset about the fact that the officer killed the perpetrator in that situation? Maybe. I personally don't see it as devaluing one life over the other as much as I ask the question of why are we politicizing it? The way I've tried to rationalize that situation is, if both of those individuals had value, how would I want that situation to be remedied? Both of those lives had value. The life of the young lady in the pink, as well as the life of the young lady who was shot. And as a Christian, and then as a citizen, do I feel like what happened in that moment gave both of those lives the greatest value? And I think that's a conversation that we should have. And if we decide that the officer acted too impulsively, because we're already making the decision that the young lady who died was impulsive. We're making the decision that her father was impulsive, right? We're already attributing impulse to everyone else in that situation. And so how come we can't evaluate the impulse of the officer? And I think that, again, these are conversations, these things happen, and we need to be able to stop and have a conversation about it. And again, establish say, lastly, to your point, and having some measure trauma that caused them to respond very quickly but very poorly to the fight when it was occurring at this house. Is that something we're willing to address? If we find that it's an issue that's closely connected to poverty or redlining or schooling, are we willing to put money in that situation? Because to me, that says that Black Lives Matter. And I think that goes back a lot to this very hotly politicized conversation about defund the police and what that means. Right? I hate the moniker, but the conversation of whether or not we are focusing on output, whether or not we're focusing on how the bad things that come out of communities versus putting money into trying to stop the bad things from coming out of the communities with healthcare, education, with drug treatment, with opportunities, with jobs, whether we're putting our money in the wrong bucket, I think that's a conversation, again, worth having.
Okay. All right. So, okay, where do I want to go? Because you just did something to me, and I it wasn't even on the points of discussion, but I'm gonna have to. I do want to hear your mindset on this. When we talk about defunding police, okay?
Yeah.
What does that look like to you? Because now, keep in mind, we actually have politicians, okay, who are actually stating no more policing, okay?
Yeah.
They now we got one side in the defund group who say, hey, no, let's reallocate funds, let's, in other words, shift money, do other things with it. And then we have others in that same pool who are saying, no, I really mean it. Defund. No more policing. Now, keep in mind, these people who are saying defund and they really mean no more policing, you have paid security. Okay? I mean, let's think about it. I mean, I don't need to drop these politicians' names and everything, but if we're paying attention to the news, we see who is calling for no more policing, defunding, police, shut it down, whatever, all of that and everything. But I mean, what does that look like to you, though?
So I think anytime anyone takes a position and it hits the news, it hits media, there are going to be extreme versions of any idea that hits the media.
Absolutely.
And even if the idea in its inception was extreme, there will be people who are going to try to bring that idea a little more centered. There are always the moderates out there trying to find a way to make it make sense. To me, I firmly believe that we have a carceral system, that we have a system that's built on punishment and incarceration, and it's built on the punishment and incarceration and monetizing Black and brown bodies. And I think that we as a society need to evaluate whether or not that's what we want to continue. We have it. It's here. We incarcerate more people in the United States than anywhere else in the world. And is that how we want our society to appear? I mean, we've seen even with the pandemic that institutions are able to release people, and it did not create melee and mass criminality on the streets. Right? Cuyahoga County and the state of Ohio just started letting people out. And yet we're okay, right? I think that we can think about what we can do.
But hold on, wait a minute. You're letting people out, but are we keeping track on what they're doing when we're letting people out? Because keep in mind, if there's no accountability, if I'm arrested, okay, for whatever crime, whatever. And then there's no accountability for my actions, whatever. But then I get bailed out or whatever. You let me back out there on the street, and I got away with it. What is the likelihood that because you let me back out. I didn't go to court, so I wasn't judged for the crime that I committed. So, and I'm back out there. Am I going to change and say, oh, phew? What is the likelihood that I'm like, phew, I got away with that one. I got away with that one. Maybe I'll just change my ways and not do this again. No, we're letting people back out to do the same things again.
I would say two things. Now, first, I'm talking about incarcerated people. So the state of Ohio, people who had been convicted and sentenced were allowed out early. I think if I understand what you're asking, you're talking about people who are out on bond for offenses. And I would argue that if anyone is in for a nonviolent crime, they should be treated as equally as those individuals who decided to storm the Capitol, the majority of which are currently out on bond. Some even allowed to travel outside of the country, which is just inconceivable.
Hey,
when
you know what?
You
say that. You say that. Let me just interject to say this. And we have a mutual friend. We have a mutual friend who, so we had this conversation, and I said to him, he brought up, hey, what do you think about the insurrectionists and everything? Yada, yada, yada. And everything. So he was trying to be cute about it. And I said, you know what? I agree with you. Every last one of them who stormed that Capitol building, every last one of them should be arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I agree with you. Along with every last one of those people who were looting last year, destroying property, not peaceful, not the peaceful protesters, because we have that right. You can go out and watch this. You can go out and make your voices heard without destroying property. So I agree. Prosecute every last one of those insurrectionists, along with every last one of the looters who destroyed property last year. We had a whole Summerfest. Cities, from nationwide, from the west to the, I don't know how far east, but from east to west, looting, destroying property, every last one of them should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Out of me, Cliff. I think the difference here is, do we weigh someone throwing a brick through a CVS differently than we weigh someone storming the Capitol of the United States? Everyone should get punished.
Right.
But do we as a society, the question is, as a society, do we see those as different? Donald Trump, in his presidency, saw them as different, right? He issued an executive order saying that if you deface a federal monument, you should get 10 years mandatory minimum, should be your sentence. I don't envision these individuals all of them will get 10-year sentences. But yes, if you decide in your passion to destroy property, then there should be consequences, regardless of whether you were out with a BLM protest or out with some protest for whatever it was that you were supporting, or if you decided to storm the Capitol. But I do see those as different consequences. One is a direct attack on our nation's institutions, and the other one is an attack, in most cases, on commercial property. And I don't devalue commercial property, but I think we have to hold our national institutions at a higher standard and in a more sacred level. Consider the fact that Congress was also in session at the time, and so they disrupted a function of our national government. To me, I just see that as exceptionally different than the comparison one tries to make to individuals who rioted during a protest. But everyone who can be found, identified, and can be found to have played a role should be prosecuted. You get no argument from me on that.
Well, I think we differ on that. I think that if you were ballsy enough to destroy statues and ballsy enough to also storm the Capitol, I think either way it go, it's destruction. If you were ballsy enough to go, if you were ballsy enough to break into my hardware store and loot, and loot that place if you got caught, I think I don't put a difference between. I understand what you're saying about they were actually taking care of, the people's business, but then we also have the business of commerce too, which was disrupted. And so now it's in the process of you making your voices heard on the street, you also destroy black businesses too. So now I throw right back in the loop again. Do black lives really matter to us too? To us. I don't know how much we only want to talk about these black lives when someone who is non-black takes a black life. And so for me, I don't think we don't take our own self seriously enough.
Do you think, I've heard this argument, and I just find it to be without support. There's more money and more institutions in the United States to address the crime happening in urban communities than has been attributed to Black Lives Matter.
Okay, say that again. Say it again.
There's more money and more support and more organizations in the United States addressing crime in the
Hold on, we get another glitch. This happened more on this episode than ever, and it appears that we don't want to get this episode going, but we want to keep it going. No, go ahead. Yeah.
I would say that what we ignore, I'll say it differently. Maybe we won't buffer. Maybe Big Brother won't stop us. But sorry. Oh, I don't believe that. This is conspiracy. But what we ignore are all the organizations and institutions that currently exist that fight against what's happening, the crime that's happening in the inner city. We try to make the argument that the Black community is only focused on the efforts of Black Lives Matter because it's getting the most attention right now. And it's amazing because a lot of individuals who claim to hate media and say that they're not media about this issue. It just takes a Google search to see how much money has been invested in the issues that are happening in the urban community as it relates to crime. And how many, you can look out of most of our doors and we'll stumble across organizations that are actively trying to address these issues. Chicago's filled with them. The problem in those areas that we fail to recognize is that they're still under the oppression of redlining. There are still policies that are keeping people in those communities. Businesses regularly have moved out of those communities. Individuals don't have the resources to get to great jobs. I mean, just today, I was driving past Rockwell Automation. Rockwell Automation, it would be a fantastic thing to have in the urban core. It's in Twinsburg. I mean, the vast majority of individuals in Cleveland, can't afford to bus. They absolutely can't bus to Twinsburg. And so now they have to have enough stability to get a reliable enough vehicle in the weather climate that we have here to get out to Rockwell Automation that's hiring. Like, this is the issues that are happening in the urban community are actively people are actively trying to address them. And yet there are still forces in place that are actively trying to keep things as they are. So, yeah, I think we care about Black lives. I think we do as an institution. It doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't address them when they do. I think the same is to be said for police. I think that we have a police force, to your question about defunding the police, we have a police force that for the vast majority of them, they do a really good job. But that doesn't mean that we can't talk about the issues that they're not doing well and the issues that are disproportionately impacting the lives of a certain community. This idea that we have to hold the police department up to some deified esteem as if they're beyond our critique as a community, to me, that's dangerous. Okay. That's scary, right? That speaks to everything that I thought America did not stand for, which is a police state.
I agree with you on that. I can ride with you on that thought there. Apparently, I'm looking at some of the comments here, and I see that apparently I'm living inside of my fear, and my preconceived notions is clouding my judgment. And you're on point though. No, but you're on point. You're good though. You're on point. I'm the one living. I'm living. Old friend of mine. I get it all the time. So I'm used to it. So I'm living within my. I don't know what I'm afraid of, but apparently I'm living within my fear. But okay. So look. Let me hurry up and shift and so explain to me your understanding about this George Floyd bill, what it does. And I also, and I didn't, that's, and I want you to kind of, and I didn't brief you on this, so I'll forgive you if you don't really know everything about it. But if you can compare it to, I think it was the Tim Scott bill that Congress shot down. How does it compare? If you don't know anything about it, it's okay. But what is this bill here?
You know, I'll say I did look into Tim Scott's bill, and I don't. While I don't remember it offhand, I don't remember loving it. And I would even say even this bill I don't love because it falls short of addressing the issue of mass incarceration. If I had a critique of all the prior presidencies that have occurred after Clinton, when we've become aware of the dangers of this monster we created in mass incarceration, that no one has really truly addressed the issue. You know, what Obama did to address it, nice, but not as much as I would have hoped.
Okay, now, so what did Obama do to address it?
Obama reduced sentence. He did sentence reduction. And
Okay.
I think the impact of sentence reduction for certain nonviolent offenders resulted in, and I could get the numbers wrong, but it was somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 individuals were released. And Trump was about the same. Trump, you know, and in fact, Trump had a number of different bills available to him, and they were watered down until he got to the first, I think it's called the first step. And I think that resulted in the release of about 3,500 people.
Okay.
And so, you know, when we have incarceration levels at the rate that we have them, the other thing, that Obama did that I thought was nice but could have done more was he reduced the disparity between crack and cocaine. Right? It was I think I could get the numbers wrong, but I think he reduced it to 16-1 as a ratio versus what it was before. So efforts were made, but I think we absolutely could do more. He was working with the tough Congress at the time. He had lost the majority he needed. And so they were, you know, it was a difficult time. I think even now what we see is that, you know, they're talking about getting rid of the filibuster because they can't get certain bills through. And so maybe that's a part of the conversation to have about the authority individuals had. But the George Floyd bill. George Floyd bill has a couple of things. I think one of the biggest highlights of it that individuals talked about is getting rid of chokeholds and removing no-knock warrants. The other thing that it does is it lowers the criminal intent standard from willful to knowing and reckless, which is really important when it comes to trying to convict someone of murder. Murder, you have to establish that they intended to murder the individual. And if you can lower that standard to they were either willful or reckless in regard to the consequences of their action, then you can cover a lot more conduct in that. It limits qualified immunity as a defense to liability in private and civil claims. And I forget the name. It escapes me right now. I forget the senator who today was talking about this. His position is that individual.
Yeah, I missed it myself.
It's one of the, I can't think of his name. I hate that it's escaping me. But his position was that we should not allow for individuals to have to lose their pension. We should not allow for individuals to be named in these suits. I struggle with that. I agree with limiting qualified immunity to the extent that you can establish that someone engaged in a willful act. If someone intentionally tried to break the law, then why should the public be on the dollar for continuing to pay their pension? That doesn't make sense. The pension is what you deserve for a job well done, not what you deserve as a consolation for breaking the law and having to resign early. So I disagree in that regard. Another highlight is it authorizes the Department of Justice to issue subpoenas and investigations of police departments for pattern and practice of discrimination. And this is really interesting because the Supreme Court recently in 2016 determined that you cannot use statistics to determine the impact of racism. You cannot. There was a long time as it related to the law where you could use disparate impact analysis. You could look at a law and say the law is neutral on its face, but it has a disproportionate impact on a certain population. And because of its disproportionate impact on a certain population, the law could be struck down as discriminatory. And there's a lot, we could have a whole thing on this because this is a place where Thomas Sowell loves to talk about, is that we should not strike down legislation.
Buffering again. Pause here a second. We're going to get right back to it. Just hold on.
About the possibility of that. And then a framework to prohibit racial profiling at federal, state, and local levels. And then they want to establish a new standard for use of force. So that's the bill as I see it. I think all of those things will go a long way to address the issue of police misconduct as it relates to use of force. I just put a kind of a caveat that I'm really looking for comprehensive reform of our criminal justice system. And I'm really hoping that this administration will find a way to do that. It's something that I've been hoping for from a number of administrations, and I hope that they do that.
Okay. And I guess, so the last portion of this conversation, we're kind of running over. You got a few minutes? Do you think you can?
I have time.
Okay.
For you, you have all night.
Man, I appreciate you, brother. I really do. I really do. So listen, I really wanted to get into this conversation about how should Christians handle our racial environment, you know, this racial climate today. How should we be handling that? And I'm going to resort back a little bit from, I remember you were invited to a church, predominantly white church.
Yeah.
And you had an opportunity to minister there. So kind of maybe in your viewpoint, how do you think as Christians we should be handling this environment today? And I bring that up, but then just go ahead and take off.
Absolutely. I think that what we have to, I think if we could acknowledge as Christians that other people are fighting the fight for us, and we're so upset at those institutions because they're not doing it the way that we think it should be done. And it's because we dropped the ball. It's because we've elected not to get in these conversations. And so if as an institution, we don't love all of the things that are being proposed by Black Lives Matter, then I think we should ask ourselves, as on a national level, you know, national, whatever your national denomination is, what your institution is doing to address the issues that are happening in these communities. Maybe you don't think that police is an issue. Then my question for you, and you think that black on black crime is the greatest thing that we should fight about, or fatherlessness. Then my question is, what have you done to identify the causes of these issues? And what are you doing to address them as a community? I love the fatherlessness argument, to me. If you look at statistics along various racial groups, the fatherlessness argument falls apart. But secondly, I think that the second question is, if fatherlessness is this big of an issue, it's not an issue because Black people pathologically do not want to be around their children. And so what is it that's attributing to fatherlessness? I think we have to begin the conversation that we're all made equal in the eyes of God, which means that none of us have some special pathology to not love our kids or to not want to be around our kids. So what else is there? Right? I think there are a lot of studies out there that talk about economic opportunities and education being a much greater indicator of what leads to fatherlessness than this idea that the social welfare system somehow incentivized dads to run away from homes. But I think that is an argument that's out there. And so I think that what I would suggest is that we have to be proactive and take a stand. And we're seeing that, right? We're seeing Black churches decide to take a stand and leave certain national bodies because those national bodies are not addressing the issues of race in a way that they feel like the Bible would call us to. And I think the Bible calls us to address race. I think we have to get rid of this notion. I'm reading a book now by Francis Chan, and I'm not done with this, so I will not give a complete critique. But one of the ideas I think he espouses in the book is that if we just focus on being Christian, it'll fix everything. And I think that that's such a dangerous logic, because the disciples were more Christian than we could ever really conceive. They walked with Jesus, yet the disciples still struggled in racism. They still struggled in traditionalism. They still struggled in these things that we're still struggling with today.
Right.
So I think that we have to. I think it's not about this kind of blind marathon that we're trying to run, about just trying to be more like Jesus without putting it in context. What does it mean to be more like Jesus?
Right.
Am I being like Jesus if I hate my brother? Right? Am I being like Jesus if I think of my brother as different? I can't tell you how many conversations I've had recently of Christians who believe that black people are bred for nothing but physical labor and that we lack higher intellect because there are so many of us in sports. These are modern day people. These are people who are walking around hiring people today, firing people today, associating people with people today who believe that black people are intellectually inferior. These issues have to be addressed by the church, because if not, people will believe that they are aligning with the will of God, but because they've never been challenged on the issue of their race and their bias, their racism and their bias, then they'll never know how far they are from the mark. So I think the church has to get in this conversation.
Okay. So, and over the past, let me say this first. I definitely plan on doing more episodes on this going into this year when we were consecrating and trying to figure out how the Lord wanted us to move. This is definitely one of the 3 areas that the Lord commissioned for me to really deal with. This issue with race. Number 1 was faith, to get our faith up. If we really were walking abundantly in the Word of God, and we really trusted Him like we say we do, then there's a whole lot of things that would be fixed. There would be no fear in the church. There would be no fear at all. We would actually just do what we've been commissioned to do. So faith was 1. 2 was race. This conversation of the church being so divided. But 3 was making God known again to the body and to the non-believers. So as I continue to move, we're going to continue these conversations about faith, race, and making God known. But now,
Love it. Let me just say this, if I may.
Go ahead.
Because there's a great book out right now called Urban Apologetics.
Yes.
And that book talks about we're losing the conversation to other culturally unique organizations like the Black Israelites, the Moors. We're losing the conversation because we're not talking about things that matter to society, talked about it at large, and we're missing it. And it's heartbreaking because you and I know the love of Christ, and we know how good it is, and so we have people out here who are being led astray by these false ideologies,
right?
Never to know the love of God because they can't find a church that will make race and racism part of the conversation.
Right.
I think my last part would be, think about the founding fathers of the United States. If you think about them, they believed that they were Christians.
Okay.
While they also owned people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not enough just to believe that you're Christian, right? It's not enough just to believe that you're following principles. The church has to be willing to educate the body on these issues.
Okay. Right. Now, and I think one of my issues, I think one of my issues is the issue of, and I've heard it bounced around a lot, the issue of willful ignorance. Willful ignorance. Because now the pastor, the man of God that I'm blessed to be under right now, this point in time, we had and I want to say this right, but he kind of went off in a way that I wasn't used to seeing, and as I'm kind of watching, this is something that happened a while back, and he said, see, there we go buffering again. You don't want me to bring this up, but we're going to get this out. But anyway, there was a situation where my wife and I were talking about how, you know, I'm trying to say this the right way. I was very aggravated with how our black churches, our black brothers and sisters, how they would use this argument of how could you leave the black church and then worship with your oppressors. And so that really got my goat, because immediately what I began to think about was, you remember when now we just finished celebrating Resurrection Day, but the week just when he was about to go into Passion Week, the week of his passion. Remember, there's a story where he had his mind to go to Samaria, and so his disciples went to set that meeting up, and the disciples Samaria decided, hey, we're cool, we don't want to, deal with it, whatever. They came back and told Jesus, hey, shall we call down fire from heaven? And so Jesus' response was this. He told them, you know not what manner of spirit you are of. And so when I hear these kind of conversations, how can you worship with your oppressor? But then on the flip side, our so-called oppressor, which I don't believe that to be the case, the willful ignorance sometime of them not helping us with this struggle, because you understand what I'm trying to fill out. We have both sides of the spectrum who really don't know what manner of spirit you are of, because we're so in love with our idea of God and Christianity and church, and we're missing the real and true God altogether. Because here's my thought. I think, and I've always thought it really just wasn't until these recent years now that is being fulfilled in my life. But I've always thought that every church should be integrated. I never thought there should be just a simple black church and a white church over here, but every church should be integrated. Because here's the problem. Here's the issue. And heaven is going to be integrated.
Without question.
So then why are you not practicing it here now? So
I have to give.
Go ahead.
No, I give credit to two people for this. The first would be my wife, because she reminds me of this phrase all the time, and it's strength overdone. And we both give credit to a friend of ours, Scott Lessing, who had us take this. It's a personality test. And what it talks about is you can have a strength, but you can overdo that strength, and you actually will hurt yourself or hurt those around you because your strength is not at a healthy level. I think about Peter and how when Jesus, to your point, when Jesus is telling Peter, I have to go to the cross, Peter engages in his strength overdone, right? He challenges Jesus on Jesus's mission, and Jesus tells him, "Get thee behind me, Satan." And what that means for me is that sometimes we can think we're saying the right thing. We can talk in terms of black power, black authority, helping our black community, but we can do so in a way that actually damages the movement. And that conversation that you're having is the same dangerous conversation that individuals have that leads them to these Black Israelite, these other faiths, because they get this idea that we're supposed to somehow take the black community to a point of dominance. We're supposed to dominate the white community as a people. Well, that's contradictory. We're supposed to figure out a way to live together.
Right.
And that means that there's going to be a sharing. Now, do we have to talk to our white brothers and our non black and brown brothers about the fact that we're not here to assimilate? right? We're not here to adopt some practice as superior to us. We can merge, we can blend and make this whole thing better. I think that's a conversation we must have. And there's a music group right now that I think I love them. And I would tell you that when I was going to an all-black church, I could not have appreciated this music, but it absolutely is fantastic worship. And it's Maverick City.
Oh, man.
And what I
yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
What I love about Maverick City is it's this cross-cultural, intergenerational praise,
Right.
where if you don't watch any of the YouTube videos, you don't, for the most part, know what anyone's ethnicity is.
Right.
And they're all praising in unison, and it's beautiful.
Yes.
I think that is, to me, that feels like heaven.
Right.
Right. The other church that I saw that did it well was Brooklyn Tabernacle. When you hear Brooklyn Tabernacle praise, they have this cross-cultural praise that feels right. No one feels like they were left out of that conversation, and they all get to worship together in one. I think that the black church, I think if you talk about things that were negative about the Black Power, Black Lives Matter movement, it's this idea of black domination versus establishing ourselves as equals within a society. And I think we have to think about approaching that, especially as a church, in a healthier way. And I think that also starts with us being in a position to have our voice heard at the table. Last point I'll make: if we're asking for the majority church to be more embracing, to embrace us more, then we have to have a seat at the table. We can't have a seat at the table walking in saying all of this is inferior, right? You don't rock like I rock. You don't fall out in the spirit like I fall out. There's no homiletic coming from the pulpit. This isn't exciting for me, right? We can't go in there kind of, spitting on all of their institutions.
Right.
We have to come in, understand, get a seat at the table, and have our voice heard. And I think that that's essential for the church.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. And I think maybe it's best to leave it there for now. But again, we're going to continue this conversation throughout the year, because I really feel like the Lord is, well, I don't really feel nothing. I know the Lord is really, I'll say this and then I'll really get ready to shut it down. We know that a day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day unto him. Okay. So I felt a shifting in the church and in the body back in 2015 or so. And I began to preach the church must repent back in 2015. It wasn't until probably like 2018 I began to see the church desolate. And I began to talk about that. Now, again, it didn't happen until late, 2019, and then all of a sudden 2020, boom, here it is. But then, the word of God tells us, Jesus said, I tell you these things before they happen, so then that when it comes to pass, you might believe. Yet and still, I want to be respectful, but I'm just going to keep it real. That's I shoot from the hip, and that's just, that's why I don't have any friends but you. You my only friend besides my wife. But it would appear that the church is still stuck on stupid, because we still are leaning on our traditions and not a pure scope and spectrum of God. And so when I say that, get out of tradition, the response comes back to me. And so what do we do about water baptism? What do we do about foot washing? What do we do about communion? So whoa, wait a minute. Those are not traditions. If you think that that's a tradition, then no wonder you lost, because those are ordinances. That is a ordinance. Water baptism or foot washing is a ordinance. Peter told Jesus, he was going to wash his feet. He said, no, I don't want you washing my feet. Jesus corrected him and said, if I don't wash you, if I don't wash you or wash your feet, then you have no part of me. So then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wash me, wash me, Lord, communion. When we're told about, and as much as we do it in remembrance of him. And we understand what baptism is, So those are not traditions. Those are actual ordinances. And so our traditions, I'm speaking about what we've been used to or how we've been used to churching. We have to get out of churchianity and begin to learn God again. I think that when we really, 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 really begin to grasp who God is in this season, I think some of our crazy rhetoric that the whole concept of churching with your oppressor, I think is to me that says that we can be just as racist as those who we charge of being racist.
Yes. So we could have a whole different, I think that we just covered 3 new podcasts that we could have together. One is on traditionalism, because I think in that conversation you're having is the question of, can our ordinances get in the way of the spread of the gospel? Right. I think Peter came in. Yes. Right. Peter came in or Paul came in and said, when I was in Rome, I ate as the Romans ate, I spake as the Romans spake, that I might win some. And so if we're leading with our ordinances and that's interfering with the truth of the gospel, then are we also having some concerns? Right. I think that's an hour. Right. And then there's another hour on exactly what you said, which is, can black people be racist? I unequivocally say yes. I think that we stop the conversation of making society more equitable when we somehow try to make it, where we somehow try to deny our contribution to it.
Okay, stop right there. Make your third point, and I want to come back to that because I was challenged on a thought about that very thing. Hit your third point, and then I'm going to come back to that.
Third point. I think my third point would be there's a great book that I just read. My friend Scott Lessing introduced me to, called Jesus and John Wayne. Fantastic book. One that we could probably. The book is incredible. That talks about the unhealthy union between nationalism, Christianity, and patriarchal leadership, and how this unhealthy union has become doctrine, and probably the vast majority of the evangelical churches today. So that's my third point.
Okay, so let me real quickly, and I promise you this will be it. I want to highlight something you said in point 2, and then
Captain America, I can do this all day.
So listen, so when I mentioned, and then you begin to kind of open up a little bit about whether black Christians or just black people in general can be racist also. Now the argument came up. There's no way that we are racist and can be racist because we don't have a system to in other words, this individual was trying to unpack what systematic racism was versus, and he was missing the fact that just because you don't have the system you don't have a system in place to hinder a group of people, it doesn't stop what's already in your heart.
In fact, the argument creates a contradiction in the fight that's happening now in the black community. Because what we're saying, what the pushback to the current fight that racism exists is that it's not systemic. And by that, there are no laws that are inherently racist anymore. Therefore, most would argue racism doesn't exist. But we would say no. It's in the hearts and minds of people and how they treat us. It's in the employer who will not hire me on the job, or the police officer who pulls me over because I have on a hoodie or just wants to investigate me. That's where we're finding racism. I think that there's the way
hold on. But what I'm talking about is that's more of a, you're explaining more of a systematic system. What I'm saying is that this individual, black brother, who says it's impossible for us to be racist because we don't have the system. Oh, okay, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Well, most people believe that racism is defined as prejudice plus power. That without power you can't be racist, and because black people, there's nothing in a democracy in America that black people can do, many would argue, without white assistance, right? We don't have a majority vote in most of the cities and towns and states within the United States. They would say we don't have any real power as a people, therefore we can't be racist. If someone wants to make that argument as a definition, and I think there are some dictionaries that use that, fine. But I would say black people can absolutely be prejudiced. And they can be prejudiced of other people, and they can be prejudiced of people within their own community. Now, I am happy to say that I have engaged in racism. I have been racist to my own community, to people in the other community, and it's something I have to actively work on because our institutions breed this kind of ideology in us, right? When we're told that the Midwestern way of communicating is a way that you can attribute intellect to how someone communicates, and that the Midwestern style of communication is the best, then we automatically devalue every form of communication, every form of slang, every form of ebonics, if you want to call it that, the way people speak in Louisiana, and they can be 10 times more educated than us. Mm-hmm. They can be 10 times more successful because they don't sound like us, and because our society has created this construct. We have to learn to unpack that level of racism that we have within our community or outside of it. The idea that black people can't be racist just holds us back. It has us saying crazy things like, you're going to a church with the oppressor.
Okay, there it is. And you know what? And we will officially end on that note. So, so we'll definitely continue this conversation in the future, probably under another title. So, just pay attention. And since we discovered that we had at least 3 more episodes based off of this. But again, I want to thank, my friend, my brother, my cousin. And I want to hurry up and release you to your wife before she calls my wife and say, tell that Negro leave my husband alone, let him go. So again, this is the Straight Truth Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Cliff Kelly, the place where the lip of truth endures forever. Thank you again for tuning in. Just remember, we are not sinless, but we sin less because of him who became sin for us. Remember, you can contact us via email at straighttruthradio@yahoo.com. That's straighttruthradio@yahoo.com. Our social media platform, Facebook, Clifford Kelly, right here, Clifford Kelly, and also Straight Truth Radio. On Twitter, at Straight Truth, the letter R1, at Straight Truth R1. And on YouTube also, Straight Truth Radio Podcast. On our podcasting formats, Anchor, Apple, Breaker, Google, Overcast, Podbean, and Spotify. Again, remember, we are not sinless. We sin less because of him who became sin for us. So until we meet again next week, remember, stay strong, stay true. God bless you. We'll see you again next week here at Straight Truth Radio Podcast.